What I'm going to look into today is terrorism, and the question that's going to guide this lesson is what is terrorism and what makes it different from other forms of violence, and look more into the various definitions of terrorism because it is a broad term, and there are lots of disagreements on what is it that constitutes terrorism, and we are going to look into the nitty-gritties that differentiate it from the other forms of violence. And and the first thing that constitutes to its definition is a terrorist act constitutes an offense under a specific country's law. And an example is the destruction of property and the killing of life. I'm not aware of a country that um, allows the killing of people innocently, and or rather the destruction of property with no legal um, acceptance. And that is actually what terrorism is most of the times. Uh, People get killed, oftentimes in scores. Also, property are destroyed, and I would say an example is during the 9/11 attack, the two World Trade Center towers were destroyed. Those were properties, and that is an example of the acts that terrorism constitutes offenses under a country's law. And the second part of the definition is that most of the terrorist acts are premeditated. They are planned, and it takes years to execute them. That means once an incident occurs, it can easily be traced to months and even years prior, where terrorists do some reconnaissance, they do a visit to the place they have selected for an attack. So that is one part of the definition one should capture, is that they are premeditated. And the third part is they use violence or threat of violence. Most documented terrorist attacks expose the use of violence, in that people get killed and in such a manner that it raises lots of concern in terms of people get angry, they get bitter, and more often people get scared because of the violence that terrorism comes with. And another is the threat of use of violence, and a worthy example is in the year 1981, New York Police City officers received 96 bomb threats within 24 hours, and although none of them was acted on, the threat of use of violence led to people leaving most parts of the city for safety, as they all were aware that there was pending violence, and everyone fled. And another part of the definition is that terrorism, the acts of terrorism, the use of violence, is used as a primary method of action. And an example is the Black September Palestinian terrorist group abducted and later on killed Israeli Olympic athletes in 1972. And their main reason was they wanted the release of some Palestinians who had been arrested in Israel. And that's an example. Other than, instead of using diplomacy, rather they choose to use violence as a method of action to get to uh, receive what it is they want. And another part of the definition is that it is intended, the acts are intended to intimidate or coerce a population. And I'll just get back into the 1972 Munich attack, where the acts intended were intended to have the Israeli government release some Palestinian prisoners, and that's how they get to receive that what it is they want to be meted unto them. And they also intend to affect a government operation that may come in instances where leading government leaders may be kidnapped or assassinated. And they also, terrorism also sees the use of violence to advance an ideology. And an example from history is the Tokyo subway attack in 1995, where the terrorist group known as Aum Shinrikyo, led by Asahara Shoko, used the poisonous gas, sarin, subways, and led to the death of people. And the main reason they did that was to advance an ideology that had not gained reception in the public, in that the cult, as is known, Aum Shinrikyo cult, perpetuated a Buddhist ideology that promoted non-Japanese themes. And it being strange, it did not receive warm welcome from the society, and as a form of backlash, they attacked innocent civilians. And that is an example of what terrorism is. They use violence to advance or defend an ideology. Another ingredient to the definition is that they use third party as targets. For instance, if they want a government to change some form of policy, rather than attack, let's say, the leaders in a government, they tend to attack the population. And when they do that, they send a message to the leaders that, let's say, we are not happy about the things you're doing, and then you're not going to keep quiet unless you do something about it. And that's an example. They use third parties during the two terrorist attacks in the US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998. They bombed the embassies, the Al-Qaeda groups, and that was a message to the US government, and not necessarily that people working in the embassy had some form of disagreement with the Al-Qaeda group, but for reasons only known to the terrorists, they killed scores of people. And that's an example of them using third parties to communicate to their intended recipients of their message. Another example is that, or rather, part of the definition of terrorism is they employ unique methods of selecting targets. And oftentimes they select targets that are symbolic, in that if a place that is symbolic is attacked, it's going to gain lots of, the incident will gain lots of popularity, and more people will get to know about it. An example is the attack of embassies, conducting attacks during an Olympic, uh, and attacking famous buildings like the two World Trade Center towers. And to wrap up the definition is that they target non-combatants. They rarely attack military personnel, but they go for civilians, and that's part of the definition of terrorism. Um, and I look forward to meeting you in my next video, where I get to do a summary of major terrorist attacks that have happened in past and in recent history. Thanks for watching. Kindly subscribe to my channel, and I hope you look forward to my next video. Thank you.